Hey, I'm the composer and poet Andrew Lloyd Fry, and this is an introduction to Philip Glass. So we'll talk a little bit about some of his biography and his life, some of the things that are interesting and notable and unique about his music, and then 3 pieces I recommend if you're new to his music to start exploring. So he grew up in Baltimore. His dad was a record store owner, so he had pretty early exposure to classical music and a lot of variety of things. And I think that was probably pretty informative for him, and access to a lot of things musically most people wouldn't have, especially as a child. So he goes to college, studies composition at Juilliard, and then goes to Paris and studies with Nadia Boulanger, which is kind of this institution unto herself. So she, it wasn't like an official college, it was just this person who had private students. So she was really connected musically. So like she was like friends with Stravinsky, and had original scores of his, and just very, very musically connected. So it was 2 years of studying with her, which if you read Philip Glass's biography, it was like crazy intense. So it's like, and it's all very like technique based versus kind of like actually composing. So it's just like a lot of like counterpoint exercises and stuff like that. So interestingly, there's a lot of American composers that went and studied with her, most notably Copland, and Virgil Thomas, and there's a generation of teachers in America that she taught. Interestingly, Copland describes her as like the sweetest lady in the world, and in Philip Glass's autobiography, it's like, whoa, she sounds really intense and intimidating, and I don't know. So super intense couple years of just like building technique, which I think is notable because he's really been charged with not knowing what he's doing or not being musically smart. And he had a lot of technique and tools, and he obviously knew what he was doing. So after that period, he comes back to New York. I think he's around 30 at this point, and just gets day jobs and starts working on his music. Now this period, the next 10 years of his life, I think is a really, really interesting thing to focus on, and I think it's a big piece of like what made him who he is. So he's just working day jobs. So he worked as a mover, he worked as a plumber, he worked as a taxi driver, he worked as a sculptor's assistant, and he just starts doing his music on his own. He just starts doing concerts. So this is incredibly unprecedented in classical music, that he completely circumvented this institution. It's this extremely institutionalized art, and it's like you have the composer and you have to go through certain institutions to connect with your audience. And it's just like, without that, you don't get to your audience. And just that's the way classical music has worked, maybe always. So it's like you have to get the commission or the grant. It's like a board of people deciding, yes, we'll do it. So he just completely went around that. And the only other example I can think of that also did this was Steve Reich. And they knew each other. Steve Reich was playing at his early concerts with Philip Glass. So he just like, I'm just going to start doing concerts. Now, if he had tried to go through the institution, his music would never have been played. The classical music was not accepting of it at all, and we would never have heard of Philip Glass, which, he is probably the most famous living composer today, and the institution would have been completely blind to him. So he starts doing concerts. Obviously, he's doing chamber work, so smaller works just because it's cheaper. It's like his first concert was like a piano and violin work, piano and saxophone work, solo violin work. And he says his first concert, the total attendance was 6 people, and one of them was his mom. So slow start. So he just keeps doing his jobs, his day jobs, and he just keeps doing concerts. And he's mostly working in he's doing concerts in art galleries, lofts, schools, and he's just kind of slowly accumulating people that he's working with and audience. And it kind of gets to the point where okay, he's doing concerts for 50 people, 100 people. But it's still pretty sporadic. It's not making money. Actually, it's losing money because he's paying his musicians. And then kind of the next jump for him was he worked on this rather large piece called Music in 12 Parts. And he had open rehearsals, so people could come during the rehearsal time, and often it was 30 to 50 people just kind of in the rehearsal space, which was a strategy to kind of bring awareness to this. And I think it took him several years to get the piece done. It's pretty long. It's 12 sections. And by the end of that, he rented Town Hall in New York, which I can't remember if that's 1,000 seat. I'm not sure on that, but it's quite a bit bigger. And to his surprise, it sold out. So again, we have this story of him taking risk, and sometimes it paid off and sometimes it didn't. But I think that's a big key to his story is again circumventing that institution of classical music and just connecting with an audience as a composer. So he borrows somewhere in there. He borrows some equipment, some recording equipment. Records his first album. Gets $1,000 loan to make LPs, and then he takes his group on tour. So he's just sending letters to schools around his area in the states around him, and hey, I'm gonna be in your area, I'd love to do a concert. So I think he got 9 shows from that. I maybe sent over 100 letters out, and he's selling his LP, and it's successful, but he gets back and it's okay, that whole thing lost money. So it's years of just slowly building and not, financially not a return. And he's, again, just doing his day jobs. So the next big leap would be he did this project, Einstein on the Beach, which is an opera. And it's kind of stretching what is the definition of opera. It's very different than what we expect kind of with that word. And this is a huge project, and it toured Europe. And a big notable piece is it played at the Met. So it's a little bit confusing because the Met didn't commission it. It wasn't a Met project, but it was hey, you can come in when we're not using the building and use the space, and then so it's a little bit different than being commissioned to play at the Met. But that point was a huge turning point for him, and where I think soon after that he was able to stop his day jobs. I think at that point he was a taxi driver, and just start doing music. So that he's about 41 at this point. So again, Einstein on the Beach, very successful. He's touring Europe, comes back at the Met. He meets him and the author of the opera, sit down with kind of the financial person at the end of the whole thing. They're feeling this high, we did it. And the whole shebang was down $100,000. So it was this thing that certainly catapulted him in awareness, but again, not financially successful. So, and then since then, at that point he started getting commissions and a little bit more acceptance in the classical music world. Okay, so let's just talk about a couple things, broad strokes about Philip Glass. So first off, I think you can clearly, there's kind of 2 periods, and his early periods, pretty much everything before Einstein on the Beach, I would say is a little bit more radical minimalism, where he's using this addition subtraction technique a lot, and I would say it's a little bit less user friendly, and it feels like some of the point is I'm being radical by this new this new language. And then post Einstein, it feels like his voice mellowed a little bit, and what most people think of as like the Philip Glass sound kind of developed after that. And I think it slowed down a little bit. A lot of his early music is kind of just like driving and energetic, and it just, keeps doing that the whole time. And it a little bit more beautiful, a little bit more soft, and a lot of what he's doing is not so much of like a different musical technique. He's using, diatonic chords and a lot of arpeggios, but it's very effective. But just this kind of delineation between those two periods. Second thing is, if Philip Glass would define himself as a theater composer. So it's like he would say, I'm not a minimalist, I'm a theater composer, which makes sense. So he's done a lot of operas, he's done film scores, and he's done concert music. And I think somebody who defines himself as a theater composer versus like just something else, it's like that their goal with music is a little bit different, and it is a different type of experience where it's like, I define myself as music that goes with something else, and you're going to write different music if that's your goal. Let's see, and then I think a third thing is the iconic Philip Glass arpeggio. So an arpeggio is where you take a chord and you're just like playing the notes one at a time, and he uses it a lot. And some people kind of complain about that. It's just like, oh, he's just doing arpeggios. And I think it just, for me, it's a very effective sound that I like. But I think it's irrelevant that it's like just arpeggios. He's like using simple materials, and I think that makes it a effective expression. And if you don't, that's fine. But it feels like he's someone that people kind of complain about a little bit. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, if you're new to his music, 3 pieces I suggest you check out. So the first one I want to talk about is Etude number 2. So he did this project, I think it's 20 or 21, I think it's 20 etudes for piano. And the goal is like, these are for me to play, and it's kind of like I'm expanding, my pianistic ability. And Etude number 2 is my favorite of that whole collection. I do have an analysis of that video if you want to check it out. Analysis of that piece, excuse me, if you want to check it out. And what I really like about that piece is the way he uses changing time signatures in a very natural way. And it's very smooth and it's very beautiful. And it's like 7/8. I can't exactly remember off my head, but it's like 7/8, 4/4, 3/4, 7/8, and it's really constantly changing, and it's so effective because the way he modeled it off of like the notes, I guess you could say the melody is really connected to the time signature thing. It's almost like that was dictating the time signature versus the time signature dictating the melody. So Etude number 2, so that's the first one. The second one is Mad Rush. So this is not a part of those 20 etudes that he wrote. Also solo piano. And this piece for me, there's an emotion that it captures that some music of Sigur Rós touches on this, some ambient music touches on this. But it has this, it kind of alternates this A-B thing between this big section and small and quiet. And the big section just has this beautiful sense of wonder. Just kind of the beauty of life is what it just kind of stirs up in me. And that's a pretty long piece, especially for solo piano. I think it's like 13 or 14 minutes. Super good, so check that out. And then the last piece is a string quartet, and the piece is called Mishima. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, / closing. And this is probably my all-time favorite Philip Glass piece. I also have analysis of this one. It's super simple, and it's just like like almost everyone, they just pick 2 chord tones and they're just going back and forth between it, and the melody is not complicated, but it's just so right. And it's it's a little bit hard to explain, like, what's the magic that makes this piece so good. And it's like I don't fully know. So it's a pretty short piece. I think it's like 3 minutes, and it's like one of those pieces where it like leaves you wanting more, which is good. That's, you don't want to, it's like eating ice cream, but you didn't eat too much. So yeah, check that one out. All right, that is it for this introduction to Philip Glass.